Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is August the 8th, 2024. It has been 3,846 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 169 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and 2 years and 166 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression. Today's podcast covers the events that happened on Wednesday and Thursday morning. You may find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. There is a link in the podcast description. There are a lot of map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian male bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. The Ukrainian Kursk offensive is significantly larger than previously assessed and has revealed some tactical goals. It remains unclear what the operational and strategic goals are. 2. We maintain that Ukrainian forces do not have enough resources to defend Donetsk, New York and the approaches to Pokrovsk and Selidove, and further assess that the combat potential of the troops deployed in Kursk is not significant enough to change that outcome. 3. We maintain that Russia will achieve the operational goal of capturing Donetsk and New York in 2024, and we further assess that for Ukrainian forces an extended battle in an urban environment is ill-advised. 4. We maintain that Ukraine's inability to re-establish air parity is enabling the Russian aerospace forces to provide almost uncontested close air support, forcing Ukrainian troops to withdraw as defensible positions are destroyed. 5. Despite the battlefield situation, Russian losses of armor, mobility and personnel continue at an unsustainable level, and the indiscriminate use of light infantry, regardless of losses, is significantly contributing to Russia's ongoing battlefield success. 6. The Russian economy is weaker than reported. 7. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine remains unsuccessful in de-Sovietizing its senior commanders and meeting its obligations to properly train all new troops, resulting in preventable battlefield errors. Additionally, these issues have contributed to critical command mistakes on the battlefield that have enabled some Russian advances. 8. Persistent delays in the delivery of promised military hardware, munitions and funding continue to prevent the Ukrainian armed forces from reaching their full combat potential. 9. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. 10. The policy of escalation management implemented by the NATO alliance and the United States, and to a small extent Germany, is a failure. We assess that the risk of a serious international incident is increasing due to Moscow's belief that NATO is unlikely to respond. 11. Russia will continue to commit increasingly worse violations of international humanitarian law until international watchdogs and Ukraine's allies take a unified and firm stance. 12. In our assessment, Russia will restart sustained attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure by October, continuing Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 4 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. 13. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear power plants. Once again, I'm starting with the action report summary because of the amount of work our team is doing to understand the situation in the Kursk region. Yesterday, Russia carried out 96 discrete assaults, and through August the 7th, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks fell to 126. It is the fewest number of assaults since June the 9th, and the first time the 7-day moving average fell below 130 since June the 19th. The VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, carried out 69 airstrikes, dropping 110 bombs on civilian and military targets, with the largest concentration of sorties conducted in the Sumy region. Russian ground forces carried out 5,200 fire missions with tubed and barrel artillery, the largest daily number of the summer offensive. The cause of the sharp decline in Russian attacks is unclear, and there is no evidence that Russia is reprioritizing its objectives. Ukrainian forces continued their offensive in the Kursk Oblast of Russia, involving 2 Ukrainian brigades and the Georgia Legion. Russian reports and geolocated videos indicate Ukraine has gained control of 17 settlements, created a 27-kilometer wide breach, advanced at least 15 kilometers, and breached the first and second echelons of Russian defenses in 2 locations. Let's dig in. This would be a good time to open up the war map on a second device and find the city of Sumy, that's in the northeastern part of Ukraine. There is a link to the map in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. Starting in the Kursk Oblast of Russia, we begin in the Sudzha area of operation, or AO. Just like yesterday, we are respecting operational security and only sharing information that is in the public domain. Russian reports and the geolocation of pictures and videos provided more clarity on Ukraine's offensive. Elements of the Ukrainian 82nd Air Assault Brigade, 22nd Mechanized Brigade, and the Georgia Legion have been identified as the units operating in Russia. At the end of yesterday's morning press briefing, White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby said that Washington would be, quote, reaching out to our Ukrainian counterparts to get a little better understanding about the situation in the Kursk Oblast. Later in the day, United States Department of State spokesperson Matthew Miller told reporters, quote, with the actions they are taking today, they are not in violation of our policy, adding that Ukrainian officials never shared their battle plan with Washington. Quick sidebar. Phew, our whole team was nervous that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan would be worried about potential escalation and interfere with the offensive. The spokesperson for the Russian Ministry of Foreign Relations, Maria Zakharova, appealed to the United Nations and the international community to, quote, strongly condemn the criminal attacks of the Kyiv regime on Russian territory. She'll be appearing on Friday at the Moscow Chuckle Hut for more stand-up comedy. Russian autocrat Vladimir Putin held an emergency session with the National Security Council. Emerging from the meeting, Putin accused Ukraine of, quote, undertaking another large-scale provocation, shelling civilians, residential buildings and ambulances. He said he would be meeting with, quote, law enforcement, the Russian Ministry of Defense, General Staff, border enforcement units of the FSB, and will listen to a report about the events in the Kursk Oblast. He also instructed First Deputy Denis Manturov to, quote, coordinate work to provide assistance to residents of the Kursk region. In the second meeting, Chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces and Commander of all Russian forces in Ukraine, General Valery Gerasimov, told autocrat Putin that, quote, the advance of the Ukrainian armed forces deep into Russia in the Kursk direction has been stopped. Grim-faced Sergei Shoigu, the former Russian Minister of Defense, attended the meeting. We'll link to the video and you definitely should watch it. The facial expressions of everyone in the room as Gerasimov reads his prepared statement, never once looking up into the camera, are priceless. There's more information in the podcast description. Shortly after Putin's first statement, Russian mercenary mill blogger Rybar blasted the Kremlin, quote, we rarely allow ourselves emotional posts when the question concerns military actions. After all, while people are working on the front lines, acting in a single camp with those who are lost is a thankless task. However, the enemy was accumulating forces for 2 months. For 2 months, all the information was sent to the useless higher headquarters." Unquote. In hindsight, the signs were there. On July the 13th, we reported that Ukraine had knocked out all of the petrol stations in the Sudzha area. Over the last month, Ukrainian drones targeted cell towers and electrical substations. As for the claim that a troop buildup had been going on for 2 months, less than 2 months ago, Chechen warlord and aspiring dentist Colonel General Ramzan Dondon Kadyrov may have contributed to the intelligence failure. Let's go back to the past. On June the 10th, Kadyrov released a video claiming that a Russian offensive into the Sumy Oblast, similar to the one in northern Kharkiv Oblast, had started. In the video, he showed a handful of Russian troops, which he claimed were Chechen Akhmat, in the border village of Lukashivka, and said that it had been captured. Russian commanders blasted Kadyrov for the fake claim. They reported that Russian sabotage and reconnaissance units frequently crossed the border in this area. Hours later, Ukrainian troops released pictures and videos of themselves relaxing in Lukashivka. Moving to assessment. After Kadyrov's false claims, the Ukrainian troop buildup started. Russian opposition telegram channel VCK GPU reported that 2 weeks ago Gerasimov ignored warnings from the deputy commander of the Leningrad military district, Lieutenant General Asadullah Abachev, of an ongoing Ukrainian buildup. Gerasimov reportedly told General Abachev, quote, not to stir panic, calling the intelligence, quote, disinformation. In our assessment, the claim by Kadyrov of a large offensive into the Sumy Oblast, which was then reinforced for weeks by Russian propagandists, set conditions for Ukraine to prepare for an offensive in plain sight. It is very plausible that the Kremlin simply believed Ukraine was deploying reserves into the area based on Kadyrov's earlier disinformation.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Yesterday, Ukrainian forces made rapid advances, with most resistance coming from small arms fire by disorganized Russian squads, airstrikes, and missile attacks. From Zhuravka in the Sumy Oblast, Ukrainian forces have advanced through Nikolaeva, Daryina, Nizhny Klin, breached the second echelon of Russian defenses, and are operating in Zelený Shlях. A fun fact for our listeners who don't speak Ukrainian. For some reason, that genuinely Russian settlement bears a Ukrainian name. Zelený Shlях means green way. Let's go back to the report. A squad of Russian troops in a UAZ-452 Lov attempted to reinforce the FSB border guards at the Zelený Shlях checkpoint, but were eliminated by a drone. Later in the day, a civilian trying to drive into the village found dead Russian soldiers on the road and their weapons abandoned. South of Zelený Shlях, a Ukrainian Bram armored recovery vehicle evacuated a Kuga HE mine-resistant armored protection vehicle, that's an MRAP, that was damaged on August the 6th. The recovery operation would not be possible if Ukrainian troops didn't have full control of the area. From Daryina, Ukrainian forces advanced northwest and reached Obukhovka. From Zelený Shlях, Ukrainian forces advanced west into Tolstoy Lug and Lyubimovka. Russian propagandist two majors claimed Ukrainian forces also occupied the Soviet-era hamlet of Pokrovsky. Multiple Russian reports claimed Ukrainian forces advanced northwest from Zelený Shlях and reached the outskirts of Korenyevo before being repulsed, which is 23 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. We are skeptical of the claim, and in our assessment, fog of war caused confusion among Russian units, or it was a squad-sized sabotage and reconnaissance unit, also known as DRG. A Ukrainian column of AMRAPs along a tree line north of Zelený Shlях was attacked by a Russian Iskander-M short-range ballistic missile with cluster munitions. The Russian video ended before a battle damage assessment could be made. It did confirm the Ukrainian advance. Ukrainian forces also advanced east from Zelený Shlях and occupied Novoivanovka, Leonidovo and Alexandria, and a Russian drone video confirmed that Ukrainian troops were in Leonidovo. From Novenka in the Sumy Oblast, Ukrainian forces occupied Sverdlikovo and continued north, reaching Lebedevka. Russian state media agency Zvezda released a video showing a German-provided Marder infantry fighting vehicle hit by at least 3 one-way drones. At least 3 other Marders were with the group, confirming the Ukrainian presence in Sverdlikovo. Ukrainian forces also advanced from Loknya in the Sumy Oblast through the former Sudzha border crossing, taking administrative control and turning the location into a processing point for Russian prisoners of war and medical evacuation. The last operational natural gas metering and compressor station that enables the Russian company Gazprom to supply Europe through Ukraine is adjacent to the Sudzha border crossing and under Ukrainian control. The station continued to run normally, with Gazprom reporting that it sent 39.4 million cubic meters of natural gas yesterday. December contract Dutch TTF natural gas futures were up 5% on the news. A drone recorded a squad of Ukrainian soldiers marching 22 Russian prisoners of war to the border checkpoint for processing. A second platoon-sized group walked to Ukrainian forces holding a white flag, some holding surrender instructions that were distributed before Ukraine started the offensive. The video showed at least 50 POWs were already assembled, making it the largest visually confirmed surrender of Russian troops since February 24, 2022. Ukrainian forces advanced northeast on the Russian R200 highway, occupying Gogolivka and reaching the Zaoleshenka roundabout, where 6 roads converge. Russian mercenary mail blogger Rybar alleged that Ukraine controls the west entrance to Sudzha, and a geolocated video released by Russian state media supported the claim. Rybar also claimed that Russian forces, which are mostly comprised of conscripts, bodyguards and the Ministry of Internal Affairs, still occupied the western bank of the Loknya River and were at risk of being cut off by further Ukrainian advances to the east. Russian sources also claimed that Ukrainian troops occupied Goncharovka, south of Sudzha. In a closed-door virtual meeting that was leaked, the acting governor of the Kursk Oblast, Alexei Smirnov, told the district's administrators, quote, "The Akhmat special forces shamefully fled from Sudzha in the direction of Kursk. The enemy's armed forces surrounded the city from all sides. An immediate evacuation of residents of the Sudzhansky district was announced." Unquote. From the Sudzha border crossing, Ukrainian forces advanced south and occupied the border village of Aleshnya. Rybar claimed that the villages of Garnal, Guyevo and Milovoy were under Ukrainian control, and Russian forces withdrew to the east bank of the Psel River. There are no other claims of Ukrainian advances in this area or visual evidence. Rybar gave us major trust issues, and we only use them as a source of last resort. Using all available intelligence sources, we assess that, at the time I'm recording this, Ukrainian forces have freedom of movement in 182.5 square kilometers of the Kursk Oblast, and another 208 square kilometers are contested or claimed as under Ukrainian control by Russian sources without evidence. The breakthrough of the first echelon of Russian defensive lines is 27 kilometers wide, and visually confirmed advances by Ukrainian forces are up to 15 kilometers deep. Despite what Gerasimov told Putin, the Ukrainian advances have not been stopped. There is additional information our analyst team knows that we can't share at this time. There has only been a vague acknowledgement of the ongoing offensive by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine and President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky. We maintain that the operational objectives is still unclear. Ukrainian forces are advancing toward Malaya Loknya in two directions, indicating that its capture is a tactical goal. Russian claims that Ukraine wants to capture the Kursk nuclear power plant in Rossolovo are a big ball of nope. It is over 50 kilometers away from the Ukrainian advance. 2 brigades are insufficient to advance that far and maintain the ground lines of communication, those are supply lines, to maintain the offensive. Further, it would violate Article 56 of international humanitarian law. Ukrainian operational security continues to be absolute. Next up, the Kharkiv Oblast. In the Liptsi-Vovchansk area of operation, fighting was limited to within Vovchansk and in the area of Tykhe. Russian forces made additional gains in the northeastern part of Hlyboke, and the map was adjusted. In the Kupiansk AO, Russian forces attempted to advance on Petropavlivka from the northeast and toward Novoosynove and Kolesnikivka. None of the attacks were successful. Moving south to the Luhansk Oblast AO, Russian forces attempted to advance from Sergiyivka in the direction of Novosergiyivka, suffered losses and retreated to their defensive positions. West of Kremenna, Russian forces attacked Ukrainian defensive positions on the eastern edge of Makiyivka and in the direction of Nevsky and Torske, with no change in the situation. Fighting also continued in the eastern part of the Serebryansky forest. Now let's talk about the Donbas and the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. In the Siversk AO, Russian forces tried to advance in the direction of Verkhnyokamyanske into western Spirne and toward Pereyizne without success. In the Kostantinivka AO, Ukrainian forces maintained their defensive lines on the western edge of the canal district of Chasiv Yar, where Russian forces concentrated their attacks. Ukrainian forces made small but tactically significant gains in the Toretsk-New York AO. Russian attacks in western Pivnichne and between Zalizne and Toretsk were repulsed. In New York, Ukrainian forces cleared the northwestern part of the settlement and reoccupied School No. 38. The war map was updated, and the situation remains critical. In southwestern Donetsk Oblast, in the Pokrovsk AO, Russian forces continued to make slow gains. Assaults on the eastern edge of Vozdvizhenka, north of occupied Novoalexandrivka, and on the western edge of occupied Vesele, that's the one west of Progress, ended in failure. Russian forces advanced into Ivanivka, occupied most of Sergiyivka, and now control half of Zhelanne. Russian forces also made marginal gains in the direction of Mezhove. There were no territorial changes in the Kurakhove AO, where the intensity of fighting remained low. Russian forces remained stuck between Netailove and Karlivka, where heavy fighting continued. In Krasnohorivka, fighting continued along the Lozova River in the northern part of the settlement. Russian attacks in the western part of Paraskoviivka and the southeastern edge of Kostantinivka ended without success. Finally, in the Vuhledar AO, fighting was reported northwest of Volodymyrivka. And that's what we know. Other segments of the podcast will return when we better understand the situation in the Kursk Oblast. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.